They laughed when she married the janitor until he flew them all to the wedding in his private jet. What began as a small-town love story became the talk of the entire community. She was mocked, humiliated, even doubted by her own family. But what no one knew was that the man everyone dismissed had a past powerful enough to change everything. Because behind the mop and bucket was a secret life that could either redeem him or destroy them both. And when the truth finally comes out, it won't just shock the guests, it will leave her questioning if she ever really knew the man she married. So the question is, was she marrying a humble janitor or a man hiding the biggest secret of all? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of First Baptist Church, casting colorful patterns across the worn wooden pew. Maggie Turner clutched her purse with trembling hands as Pastor Mike made the final announcement. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she waited for him to finish. And that concludes our announcement for today. Does anyone else have something to share before we dismiss? This was her moment. Maggie rose slowly from her seat in the third row, where she sat every Sunday for the past 35 years. She smoothed her floral dress and cleared her throat. I have an announcement, she said, her voice wavering slightly. All eyes turned toward her. Familiar faces, people she taught in Sunday school, neighbors she'd known for decades, friends who supported her through her husband's illness and passing 3 years ago. I wanted to share some happy news. Maggie paused, took a deep breath. Joseph Ramirez has asked me to marry him, and I've accepted. The silence lasted only seconds, but to Maggie it stretched like an eternity. Then came the murmurs, rippling through the congregation like wind through cornfields. The janitor? Someone whispered loudly enough to carry. From the high school? Another voice added. Pastor Mike's smile tightened at the corners. Well, that's wonderful news, Maggie. Congratulations to you both. We'll certainly keep you in our prayers. Maggie scanned the faces before her. A few, mostly her closest friends, offered genuine smiles, but many others exchanged glances, eyebrows raised, lips pursed in poorly concealed judgment. Her daughter, Beth, sitting in the back row with her husband and teenage sons, stared at her mother with wide, disbelieving eyes. They hadn't spoken about Joseph yet. Maggie had wanted to tell her privately, but now that chance was gone. Thank you, Maggie managed, sinking back into her seat as heat crept up her neck. After the final blessing, people filed past her with mechanical congratulations. How unexpected, said Donna Wilson, the church secretary. Very sudden, isn't it? Commented Harold Peters, squeezing his wife's arm meaningfully. Beth marched up to her, teenage sons trailing awkwardly behind. Mom, you're marrying the janitor? When were you planning to tell me? I was gonna call you today, honey. We'll talk about this later. Beth cut her off, glancing around at the curious onlookers. Boys, say goodbye to your grandmother. Her grandsons mumbled quick goodbyes before Beth ushered them away, leaving Maggie standing alone in the emptying sanctuary. Pastor Mike approached, his expression kind but concerned. Maggie, I'm happy you found companionship. Joseph seems like a decent man. Just be sure you are thinking clearly. I am pastor. Joseph is a good man. Of course, he patted her arm. Love can find us in the most unexpected places. The church emptied quickly. No one invited her to Sunday lunch as they often had in the past. Maggie gathered her things and stepped out into the bright spring morning, deciding to walk home rather than accept a ride from anyone. As she passed the church garden, two women stood by the rose bushes, their hats bent together in conversation. Maggie recognized Judith Allen and Meredith Cooper, both long-standing members of the church board. She's really marrying the janitor? Judith whispered, not noticing Maggie approaching. Poor thing must be desperate. Maggie froze mid-step. The words struck her like physical blows. She straightened her shoulders and continued walking, pretending not to have heard, but the sting of shame burned in her chest as tears threatened to spill. Maggie pulled the pot roast from the oven, the rich aroma filling her modest kitchen. Sunday dinners were sacred, the one time her busy children made time to gather at her table. Tonight would be different, special. She'd tell them properly about Joseph, make them understand. The doorbell rang precisely at 5. Laura arrived first, medical bag still slung over her shoulder from her shift at the hospital. Sorry, I'm late, Mom. She kissed Maggie's cheek. Emergency came in right at shift change. You're right on time, sweetheart. Laura sniffed the air. Pot roast? You're pulling out all the stops tonight. Michael arrived minutes later with a bottle of wine. Tall and confident like his father had been, he filled the doorway with his presence. Something smells amazing. He hugged Maggie, then noticed the table set with her good china. What's the occasion? Let's sit down first. Maggie's hands trembled slightly as she carried the roast to the table. They settled into their usual places, the same chairs they'd occupied as children. Maggie said grace, her voice steady despite her nerves. As they passed dishes around, she watched her children, these grown strangers who carried pieces of her heart. I have news, she began, setting down her fork. I wanted you both to hear it from me properly. Laura and Michael exchanged glances. This morning at church, I announced my engagement. Michael's fork clattered against his plate. Engagement? To who? Joseph Ramirez. Maggie smiled, picturing Joseph's kind eyes. He asked me last week. The high school janitor? Laura's nurse's mask slipped into place, the careful neutrality she used with patience. Yes, we've been seeing each other for several months now. Several months? Michael repeated. And you never mentioned him? I wanted to be sure before bringing someone new into our family circle. Laura set her napkin down. Mom, I don't understand. You barely know this man. I know him well enough, Laura. He's kind and thoughtful, and he's the janitor, Michael interrupted. What can he possibly offer you? Maggie's cheeks burned. Not everyone measures a person's worth by their job title, Michael. That's not what I meant. But his expression said otherwise. Laura leaned forward. Mom, have you thought this through? Dad left you comfortable, but not wealthy. What happens if you get sick? Can Joseph even support you? Joseph works hard. He's reliable, and does he even have health insurance? Laura continued. Retirement savings? What's his plan for your future together? We'll figure those things out. Maggie pushed food around her plate. What matters is that we care for each other. Michael shook his head. This is happening awfully fast. You've been alone since Dad died, and now suddenly you're marrying someone none of us knows? I'm not asking permission, Maggie said quietly. I'm sharing my happiness with my children. Laura reached across the table, squeezing Maggie's hand. Her voice softened. We want you to be happy, Mom. We do, but we also worry. A man his age, with his position. I just worry he might not be able to provide what you need. And what do I need, Laura? Security, stability, someone you can depend on. Michael pushed his plate away. Mom, you're rushing into this. At least take some time, introduce him to us properly before you make any permanent decisions. Maggie forced a smile, though her heart sank like a stone. The wedding is in 3 weeks. I hope you'll both be there. The silence that followed spoke volumes. Maggie's kitchen clock ticked loudly, marking each second of the growing distance between her and her children. The morning light filtered through the windows of Maggie's third-grade classroom, casting warm rectangles across the alphabet chart and student artwork. She arrived earlier than usual, needing the comfort of her classroom, the one place where her worth wasn't measured by others' expectations. Maggie arranged worksheets on each desk with methodical precision. Last night's dinner replayed in her mind, Laura's concerned frown, Michael's dismissive tone. She'd hardly slept, their words echoing like accusations. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was being foolish. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. Joseph stood in the doorway, his silver-streaked hair neatly combed, work shirt pressed despite its worn edges. In his weather hands, he held a simple bouquet of daisies, their white petals bright against his tan skin. Morning, Maggie. His voice carried the slight accent that emerged when he spoke softly. Found these growing near the basketball court, thought they might brighten your day. Something in Maggie's chest loosened at the sight of him. Joseph never entered a room demanding attention, yet his quiet presence filled spaces others couldn't reach. They're beautiful. She accepted the flowers, their stems still cool with morning dew. Thank you. Joseph studied her face, missing nothing. You look tired. Everything okay? Maggie busied herself finding a vase in the supply cabinet. Just didn't sleep well. Your children didn't take the news so good? She paused, water running over her fingers. How did you know? Been around long enough to recognize when someone's carrying a heavy heart. He took the vase from her trembling hands, filled it, and placed the daisies inside. Want to talk about it? Maggie sank into her desk chair. They think I'm making a mistake. That I'm rushing. That she stopped, unable to repeat their judgments. That I'm not good enough for you. Joseph nodded, no surprise or offense in his eyes. Because I push a broom for a living. It's not fair how they judge you without knowing you. Joseph pulled a child-sized chair beside her desk and sat, his knees nearly touching his chest. Despite the awkward position, he maintained his dignity. People see what they expect to see, Maggie. Your children love you. They want security for you, but they don't understand that a man can be rich in ways that don't show in his bank account. A small smile crossed his face. It's natural they worry. When you love someone, you want the best for them. Maggie touched the daisy petal. I know what's best for me. Do you? His question held no challenge, only genuine care. I thought I did, but now her voice caught. What if they're right? What if this is all happening too fast? Joseph took her hand, his palm calloused from years of honest labor. Maggie Turner, I've lived long enough to know when something's real. What we have, it's real, but if you need more time, I'll wait. Your peace matters more than any ceremony. His selflessness brought tears to her eyes. I don't want to wait. I just wish they could see you like I do. They will. Time has a way of revealing truth. He squeezed her hand. Know this, I may not have fancy things to give you, but as long as I live, I'll take care of you with honesty and love. The promise hung between them, simple yet profound. Maggie felt certainty bloom inside her heart. She believed him completely, even as her children's doubts echoed faintly in some corner of her mind. Maggie pushed her cart down the cereal aisle of Jenkins' grocery, pretending not to notice how conversations paused when she rounded each corner. The fluorescent light seemed harsh today, illuminating every curious glance and whispered comment. She reached for a box of granola and caught sight of Mrs. Peterson and her daughter by the canned goods. Heads bent together, eyes darting in her direction. Their hushed voices carried just enough for Maggie to catch fragments. School janitor. And after Harold passed. Maggie's cheeks burned. She taught in this town for 30 years, attended church here all her life. Now she felt like a stranger in her own community. There you are. Eleanor Davis's voice boomed from behind, making Maggie jump. Been looking all over for you. Eleanor, 74, and proud of every year, wore her usual floral dress and sensible shoes. Her silver hair was pinned in its perfect bun, not a strand out of place. She grabbed Maggie's arm with surprising strength for someone her age. How are you holding up? Eleanor asked, her volume unchanged despite the public setting. I've been hearing things. Maggie smiled weakly. I'm fine, Eleanor. Just getting some groceries. Well, you're braver than I be, walking here with your head high after all the talk. Eleanor began examining apples with military precision. Everyone's saying you've lost your mind, marrying the janitor when you could have had Richard Wilson. He's been sweet on you since Harold's funeral. Eleanor, please, I'm just telling you what people are saying. Eleanor tossed an apple into Maggie's cart. That one's good. Anyways, Meredith Johnson told the entire quilting circle, you're lowering yourself. Said a teacher with your reputation could do better than someone who cleans toilets for a living. Maggie's throat tightened. Joseph is a good man. Oh, I'm sure he is, dear. Eleanor patted Maggie's arm. No one's saying he isn't nice, but you have to admit, it's unusual. A widow of your standing with the night janitor? People talk. I don't care what people say. The words came out sharper than Maggie intended. Eleanor raised her eyebrows. Well, that's the spirit. Though between us, she leaned closer, her perfume overwhelming. Are you sure about this? It's not too late to call things off. People would understand if you came to your senses. Maggie gripped her cart handle tighter. I haven't lost my senses, Eleanor. I found love. Love at our age, Eleanor chuckled. Honey, at this stage, most people settle for companionship and financial security. Speaking of which, can that man even support you? I heard the school pays minimum wage for custodial staff. We'll manage just fine. Maggie's voice wavered slightly. Eleanor's expression softened into something like pity. I'm only looking out for you, dear. We all are. No one wants to see you struggle or be taken advantage of. Joseph, Would never. Of course not. Eleanor checked her watch. Oh, I'm late for my hair appointment. You think about what I said, though. There's no shame in changing your mind. She bustled away, leaving Maggie standing alone amid curious stares. The remaining items on her list suddenly seemed unimportant. She abandoned her half-filled cart in the aisle and hurried out. That night, Maggie sat on the edge of her bed, the house echoing with silence. The tears came quietly, sliding down her cheeks as she clutched her pillow to her chest. Lord, she whispered into the darkness, please, give me strength. Help me stand firm when everyone thinks I'm falling. Help me trust my heart when everyone questions my mind. Her prayer hung in the still bedroom, a fragile hope in a sea of doubt. The Pleasant Valley Community Center had never looked so inviting. White fairy lights draped from the ceiling beams, lending a soft glow to the otherwise plain banquet hall. Centerpieces of wildflowers and candles adorned each table. Maggie's touch, simple and elegant, without being extravagant. More punch, Mrs. Turner. The catering assistant held a crystal ladle over the bowl. Soon to be Mrs. Ramirez. Maggie corrected with a gentle smile, though her stomach tightened as she said it. And yes, thank you. A week had passed since the grocery store incident. 7 long days of fielding concerned phone calls and dodging pitying looks. Now, surrounded by 30 of their closest friends and family, the whispers continued. Maggie watched as her daughter Laura huddled with her husband in the corner, their expressions serious as they glanced toward Joseph. Joseph stood by the buffet table, alone despite the crowd. He wore a navy suit not new but freshly pressed. His silver-streaked hair was neatly combed, his shoes polished to a shine. He caught Maggie's eye across the room and smiled, warm and steady. Pastor Williams approached Joseph, shook his hand briefly, then quickly excused himself to speak with the church deacons. The message was clear, polite courtesy, nothing more. Michael, Maggie's son, finally made his way to Joseph with reluctant steps. Evening, Mr. Ramirez. His handshake was perfunctory. Mom seems happy. I hope to keep her that way. Joseph's voice carried dignity despite Michael's stiff posture. Just so we understand each other. Michael leaned closer, lowering his voice, unaware that Maggie had moved within earshot. My mother's been through enough. If this is about her teacher's pension. Michael! Maggie interrupted, color rising her cheeks. Her son straightened, not quite apologetic. We're just talking, Mom. Conversations faltered throughout the room. Eleanor Davis, seated with the church ladies, whispered something behind her hand that made the entire table turn to stare. Joseph touched Maggie's elbow gently. It's all right. The calm in his eyes steadied her racing heart. Dinner proceeded with the uncomfortable rhythm of forced politeness. Forks clinked against plates. Talk remained superficial weather forecasts. Margaret Wilson's hip replacement. The high school football team's chances this season. Nobody mentioned tomorrow's wedding ceremony. Nobody congratulated the couple. Whenever Joseph spoke, the responses were brief, followed by quick shifts to new topics. After the third such exchange, he fell silent, eating his chicken with quiet dignity. Is everything satisfactory? The catering manager appeared at Maggie's side. The food is wonderful, she answered, though she barely tasted it. Time for the toast, I think. Eleanor announced from across the room, her voice carrying the false brightness of someone determined to move things along. Michael, don't you want to say something about your mother? Michael stood reluctantly, raised his glass, and offered generic well wishes that never once mentioned Joseph. Laura followed with similar stilted sentiments. The awkward silence that followed felt endless. Maggie clutched her napkin under the table, fighting back tears. Joseph placed his hand over hers, a gentle squeeze of reassurance. Then, with a grace that surprised even Maggie, he rose to his feet. The movement was unhurried, deliberate. He straightened his tie, picked up his water glass, and cleared his throat. The room fell completely silent. Forks stopped midair. Whispers died. For the first time that evening, every eye in the room turned directly toward Joseph Ramirez. Joseph stood still for a moment, scanning the faces turned toward him. He held his water glass without pretension, his weathered hands steady. I was 14 when I got my first job sweeping floors at Martinez Auto Shop. He began, his voice quiet but clear. Every evening after school, I'd take the city bus across town and work until midnight. Mr. Martinez paid me $3 an hour, and I saved every penny. He paused, a slight smile touching his lips. Those first calluses on my hands made me proud. My father had died the year before, and those calluses meant I was becoming a man who could work. The room remained silent, but something in the atmosphere shifted. Eleanor Davis stopped whispering. Michael's posture softened almost imperceptibly. By 20, I was mopping hospital corridors overnight and taking community college classes during the day. Some nights I'd be cleaning the floor where my mother worked as a nurse before her arthritis got bad. Joseph's gaze found Maggie's. She taught me that no honest work diminishes a person. Laura shifted in her seat, her earlier judgment replaced by something like uncertainty. I've been a maintenance man, a night watchman, a janitor at 3 different schools. I've unclogged toilets that will make grown men weep. A ripple of surprised laughter moved through the room, and I've never once been ashamed. Joseph took a small sip of water, then continued. I remember my first week at Riverside High. I was mopping the teacher's lounge late one evening when Miss Turner here, he nodded toward Maggie, was working late grading papers. She didn't see me as the invisible man with the mop. She offered me coffee, asked my name, talked to me about her students. Maggie felt tears gathering. She'd forgotten that first meeting 3 years ago. Every evening after that, we'd talk. Sometimes 5 minutes, sometimes an hour, about books, about her students, about life. Joseph's voice grew softer, and every time she looked me in the eye, not through me, not around me, but at me. A few heads nodded. Pastor Williams set down his fork. In 63 years, I've learned that dignity isn't in a job title or a paycheck amount. It's in doing honest work with integrity. It's in how you treat the person cleaning your floors. He looked around the room without accusation, just simple truth, and it's in recognizing that worth in others when the world doesn't. Joseph turned fully toward Maggie now. Margaret Turner saw my worth when others saw only a janitor. She listened when others walked past. She valued my thoughts when others assumed I had none worth hearing. His voice filled with quiet emotion. And if I live another 30 years, I will spend every day trying to be worthy of that kind of seeing. Joseph raised his glass. To my Maggie, who reminds me of what my mother always said, the measure of wealth is not what you have, but who you are. The silence that followed felt different, full rather than empty. Then Eleanor Davis dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. Pastor Williams cleared his throat, visibly moved. Michael looked down at his plate, something like shame crossing his features. Maggie's friend Ruth was the first to stand, raising her glass. To Maggie and Joseph, she said warmly. Others joined, one by one, until the whole room stood in toast. As Joseph sat down, Maggie squeezed his hand beneath the table, a fierce pride filling her chest. His eyes met hers, steady and true. For the first time since announcing their engagement, she felt a flicker of hope that their love might be not just accepted, but understood. The warmth in the room lingered as conversations resumed, gentler now, with genuine smiles replacing forced politeness. Maggie leaned against Joseph's shoulder, savoring this moment of acceptance. Your words changed something in them, she whispered. Joseph squeezed her hand. Truth has a way of doing that. The sharp bang of the banquet hall doors interrupted the peaceful moment. Every head turned as a tall figure stood silhouetted in the doorway. Well, well, well. The voice cut through the room like a knife. What a touching little gathering. The man who strolled in resembled Joseph in height and build, but where Joseph's face carried lines of quiet dignity, this man's features were sharper, harder. His suit looked expensive, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. A gold watch glinted at his wrist. Joseph went completely still. Victor, he said, so quietly only Maggie heard. Victor Ramirez surveyed the room with a mocking smile before his gaze settled on Joseph. My long-lost brother, the philosopher janitor. He clapped his hands slowly. Bravo on that little speech. You always did have a talent for making poverty sound noble. Michael stood halfway from his chair. Who are you? Victor Ramirez. He bowed with exaggerated flourish. The successful brother. His eyes flicked to Joseph, the one who didn't throw everything away. Maggie felt Joseph's hand tighten around hers. This is a private gathering, Pastor William said, rising to his feet. Victor ignored him, walking toward Joseph and Maggie's table. I heard my only brother was getting married. He placed both hands on the table, leaning forward. Couldn't miss the chance to congratulate the happy couple. His smile never reached his eyes. How did you find out? Joseph asked. Small world, Joey. Smaller town. Victor straightened, addressing the room now. Did my brother tell you all about our family business? About the millions he walked away from? He laughed, the sound sharp and brittle. Or did he just feed you that dignity in labor nonsense? Confused murmurs rippled through the room. Maggie looked at Joseph, whose face had gone pale. Victor, please. Joseph stood slowly. This isn't the place. Oh, I think it's exactly the place. Victor circled the table. These good people deserve to know who they're really dealing with. Joseph Ramirez, heir to Ramirez Aviation, who threw away a fortune because he couldn't handle the pressure. He snapped his fingers, just like that. Walked away from the family business my father built, leaving me to salvage what I could. Eleanor gasped. Laura's eyes widened as she stared at Joseph. He abandoned everything, Victor continued, voice dripping with contempt. Our legacy, our name, and now he mops floors and pretends it's some kind of spiritual choice. He looked directly at Maggie. Did he tell you that part, Mrs. Soon-to-be Ramirez? Or did he just play the humble working man? Joseph remained silent, his jaw tight. He had everything, Victor said, spreading his arms wide. Private jets, vacation homes, respect in the business world. And he threw it all away, his voice hardened, made himself nothing. And for what? Maggie stood, placing her hand on Joseph's arm. I think you should leave. Victor's laugh was cruel. Defending him already? How sweet. He looked around the room. You are all being duped by a man who couldn't handle success. A coward who ran from responsibility and now hides behind a mop. Gasps filled the hall. The warmth that had filled the room moments before evaporated like morning dew. Maggie felt the ground beneath her hope shift again. Joseph's hand trembled slightly in hers as he stood silent against his brother's onslaught, offering no defense. Morning light spilled through the curtains of Maggie's modest living room, catching dust motes that danced in the air. The house felt too quiet, too empty for what should have been the happiest day of her life. Maggie sat in her favorite armchair, already dressed in her cream-colored wedding suit, fingers twisting the small pearl bracelet that had belonged to her mother. After Victor's appearance last night, the rehearsal dinner had dissolved into awkward clusters of whispers. Joseph had said little, simply asking to drive her home and promising to explain everything today. Laura paced by the window. He should have told you, Mom. We don't know what really happened, Maggie said, though doubt gnawed at her. The phone had rung 3 times already, friends calling with concerns, each conversation making her stomach tighten further. Michael sat on the couch, tie hanging loose around his neck. Eleanor called this morning. She heard Joseph lost the company in some scandal. That's not what Victor said, Maggie countered, though her voice lacked conviction. Victor didn't need to say it. Why else would someone walk away from everything? Laura stopped pacing. Mom, you don't have to go through with this. A gentle knock at the door silenced them. Maggie's heart leapt to her throat. Joseph stood on the porch, dressed in a simple dark suit. His eyes, usually so steady, looked tired, but he managed a small smile. May I come in? Maggie nodded, moving aside. The silence felt heavy as Joseph entered the living room where Laura and Michael watched him warily. I know you have questions, he said quietly, and you deserve answers. But first, I'd like to ask all of you to come with me. He looked at Maggie. Please. Laura crossed her arms. Come where? The church isn't expecting us for 2 hours. Not the church. Somewhere else first. Joseph's gaze returned to Maggie. Trust me one more time. Maggie studied his face, the face she'd grown to love for its kindness, its quiet strength. Whatever Joseph had been, whatever he'd done, that much at least was real. All right, she said. 20 minutes later, Joseph's old truck turned down a narrow road that led away from town toward the small regional airport. Michael and Laura exchanged glances from the back seat. The airport? Laura asked. Why are we? Her words died as they rounded a bend. Ahead lay a private airfield, and there, gleaming in the morning sun, sat a sleek white jet, its polished surface catching the light. Joseph parked and turned to face them. I need to show you something before we say our vows. They followed him across the tarmac in stunned silence. A uniformed attendant nodded respectfully. Good morning, Mr. Ramirez. Everything's ready. Thank you, Calvin, Joseph said, then turned to face Maggie and her children. The wind gently tousled his silver-streaked hair as he took Maggie's hands in his. 30 years ago, I started with one small plane and a dream, built it into Horizon Aviation. His voice was steady, calm. When partners wanted to cut safety corners to increase profits, I refused. They tried to force me out. I could have fought, dragged everyone through legal battles, destroyed lives. He looked toward the jet, then back at Maggie. Instead, I walked away with enough to live quietly. Left the company, changed my name back to my mother's maiden name, Ramirez. His eyes held hers. I once built an aviation company. I left it for integrity, not failure. And I wanted you to know the man, not the fortune. Maggie's lips parted in surprise. Laura stood frozen. Michael's jaw dropped as they stared at the gleaming aircraft. Shall we? Joseph extended his hand toward the waiting jet. Speechless, they followed him up the stairs and into another world. Maggie stepped into the jet and froze. The interior gleamed with polished wood and butter-soft leather, plush cream seats lined both sides, and a small crystal vase of fresh flowers adorned each table. Sunlight streamed through oval windows, catching on crystal glasses arranged on a sideboard. This is yours? Laura whispered, her earlier suspicion replaced with awe. Joseph nodded. One of three, the others are leased to executives. Eleanor and her husband Tom, who had arrived separately at the airfield, climbed aboard next. Eleanor's mouth fell open, her eyes starting from the luxurious cabin to Joseph in his simple suit. But you're the... She stopped herself, flushing with embarrassment. The janitor? Joseph finished with a gentle smile. Yes, and a pilot. And once a CEO. More guests arrived, those who had whispered behind Maggie's back, those who'd exchanged glances when Joseph entered the room. They boarded with wide eyes and hushed voices. Pastor Williams nodded respectfully to Joseph, clearly reassessing the man he'd known only as the quiet figure who sat in the back pew each Sunday. Please, make yourselves comfortable, Joseph said. We'll be in the air about 90 minutes. He touched Maggie's elbow gently. Would you like to join me in the cockpit? The cockpit was compact but state-of-the-art, with gleaming controls and wide windows. Joseph settled into the pilot's seat with the ease of a man returning home. His hands moved confidently across the instrument panel, flipping switches and checking gauges. You're flying us yourself? Maggie asked, lowering herself into the co-pilot's seat. I never gave up my license. His eyes crinkled. Some things are too much a part of you to let go. Through the open cockpit door, Maggie saw her friends exploring the cabin in amazement. Michael examined the fine woodwork with professional interest. Laura ran her fingers over the embossed leather seats. Eleanor appeared to be apologizing to her husband. You could have told me, Maggie said softly. Joseph's hands paused on the controls. I wanted someone who loved Joseph the janitor, not Joseph the aviation magnate. He looked at her. Was that wrong? Before she could answer, the radio crackled. Joseph responded with technical language that Maggie didn't understand but that flowed from him naturally. Minutes later, the engines hummed to life. The takeoff was smooth, the powerful jet climbing into the clear blue sky with barely a tremor. Through the cabin door, Maggie heard gasps of delight and nervous laughter from their guests. As they leveled off, Joseph engaged the autopilot and turned to her. I've arranged for us to be married at a place I think you'll love, a small villa overlooking the ocean. Is there anything else I should know about you? Maggie asked. Joseph took her hand. Only that everything I ever told you about how I feel was absolutely true. For the rest of the flight, Joseph pointed out landmarks below while explaining how he'd built his company from nothing, his voice alive with passion Maggie had never heard before. This was a side of him the world had missed, the visionary behind the humble man who buffed school hallways. The jet began its descent, and through the windshield, Maggie saw it, a breathtaking coastline of white sand and turquoise water, dotted with palm trees and flowering bougainvillea. A terracotta-roofed villa perched on a bluff overlooking the ocean, its garden spilling down toward the beach. Maggie clutched Joseph's hand as he guided the plane lower. "I always believe in you," she whispered, her eyes shining with tears. "Always." The jet's wheels touched down on the private airstrip with barely a bump. As the engines quieted, Maggie peered through the window at the paradise that awaited them. Palm trees swayed in the gentle breeze, and beyond them, the ocean sparkled like scattered diamonds under the afternoon sunday. Joseph helped Maggie down the aircraft steps, his touch steady and sure. The moment her feet hit the ground, a warm tropical breeze caressed her face, carrying the scent of salt water and exotic flowers. "It's breathtaking," Maggie whispered. "Not as breathtaking as you," Joseph replied, his eyes crinkling at the corners. A line of luxury cars waited to transport them to the villa. Maggie watched her guests' faces as they exited the plane, each one a mixture of awe and lingering disbelief. Laura kept shaking her head, while Michael photographed everything with his phone. Eleanor, who had been Maggie's most vocal critic, couldn't meet her eyes. The short drive to the villa wound along a coastal road that hugged cliffs overlooking the sea. When they rounded the final bend, a collective gasp filled the car. The villa was a sprawling Mediterranean-style estate with terracotta roof tiles and whitewashed walls draped in vibrant bougainvillea. Stone steps descended through terraced gardens toward a private beach below. "Welcome to Casa del Mar," Joseph said, his voice warm with pride. "I've been saving this place for something special." Staff greeted them at the entrance with cold drinks and cool towels. The marble foyer opened onto a grand living area where floor-to-ceiling windows framed the ocean view. Fresh flowers adorned every table, their fragrance mingling with the sea air. "Your rooms are prepared," the property manager announced. "We've arranged everything according to Mr. Ramirez's instructions." While the guests were shown to their accommodations, Joseph led Maggie to a private terrace overlooking the water. A small table had been set for two, with a bottle of champagne chilling in a silver bucket. "Too much?" he asked, suddenly uncertain. Maggie shook her head, tears filling her eyes. "It's perfect. I just never imagined." "That a janitor could provide this?" His eyes twinkled. "That anyone could love me this much." The afternoon passed in a blur as Maggie's grandchildren arrived with Michael's ex-wife. 7-year-old Emma and 9-year-old Caleb raced through the gardens, their excited shrieks blending with the sound of waves crashing below. As sunset approached, staff members set up chairs and tables on the beach. A chef grilled fresh seafood, while others arranged a pyramid of wood for a bonfire. Lanterns hung from temporary posts stuck in the sand, their glow strengthening as daylight faded. Joseph shed his formal jacket and rolled up his sleeves, helping Caleb build a sandcastle near the water's edge. Maggie watched from her beach chair, heart full, as Emma joined them, decorating the castle walls with shells and bits of coral. "He's good with them," Laura said, settling beside her mother. "He is," Maggie agreed. "He's good in ways that have nothing to do with his place or his money." The bonfire blazed to life as stars appeared overhead. Grandchildren roasted marshmallows while Joseph told stories that made them giggle. When Emma climbed into his lap without hesitation, Maggie caught her breath at the tender look on Joseph's face. Later, with the children sleepy but fighting to stay awake, Joseph pulled out his guitar, another hidden talent, and played soft melodies that blended with the rhythm of the waves. Maggie leaned against his shoulder, surrounded by family, watching sparks from the fire drift upward to join the stars. For this moment, everything was perfect. The doubts, the whispers, the judgment, all seemed to belong to another world far away. Here, with ocean breezes carrying the scent of salt and smoke, with laughter warming the night air, Maggie knew she had made the right choice. Morning sunlight danced across the waves as Maggie sipped her coffee on the villa's main balcony. The sea stretched before her like a living painting, azure waters fading to cobalt at the horizon, whitecaps breaking in rhythmic patterns against the shore. A gentle breeze carried the scent of salt and jasmine. The sliding glass door opened behind her. Laura stepped out, her own mug steaming in her hands. Her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, and for a moment, Maggie saw the little girl who once brought her dandelions from the yard. "Beautiful morning," Laura said, joining her mother at the railing. "It feels like a dream." Laura nodded, watching a seabird dive into the water. "Mom, I need to say something." Maggie turned, noticing the unusual softness in her daughter's expression. Laura had always been her practical child, quick to analyze, slow to change her mind. "I was wrong about Joseph." Laura stared into her coffee cup. "When you told us you were marrying the school janitor, I thought you were making a terrible mistake." "I remember." Maggie kept her voice gentle, though the memory of that Sunday dinner still stung. "I was so sure he wanted something from you, your house, your savings." Laura shook her head. "I even called the school district to ask about him." "You did what?" Laura's cheeks flushed. "I know. It was terrible. But I was worried about you being alone after Dad died, vulnerable to someone taking advantage." A pelican glided past, its wings nearly touching the waves. "And what did you learn from your investigation?" Maggie asked. "That he had a perfect employment record, never missed a day, volunteered for extra shifts when others called in sick." Laura met her mother's eyes. "His supervisor said Joseph was the most reliable person he'd ever hired." Maggie smiled. "That sounds like my Joseph. I still thought he was just a janitor, though." Laura leaned against the railing. "I never imagined all this." She gestured toward the villa, the private beach below. "Why didn't he tell you who he really was?" "Because this isn't who he really island." Maggie set her mug down on the small table. "The planes, the money, that's what he has, not who he island. Who he is the man who waxed the school floors until they gleamed because children deserve beautiful spaces. The man who fixed the playground equipment on weekends because it made the kids happy." Laura nodded slowly. "I think I understand now. And watching him with Emma and Caleb last night, he has a good heart. That's what I fell in love with." "I'm sorry I doubted you." Laura's voice cracked. "I was so busy protecting you that I couldn't see what you saw. You were looking out for me. That's what family does. But I should have trusted your judgment. You always could see the best in people." Maggie reached for her daughter's hand. "There's still time to get to know him, the real him." Laura's eyes glistened. "I like that." Maggie pulled her daughter into a tight embrace, relief washing through her. This was the blessing she hadn't dared hope for, her family coming together, accepting Joseph, seeing his worth beyond appearances. Meanwhile, in the shadow corner of the villa's east wing, Victor Ramirez pressed his phone to his ear, his voice a harsh whisper. "It's time to move forward. Send the documents to the financial authorities first thing tomorrow." He paused, listening. "Yes, I understand the risks, but my brother won't know what hit him until it's too late." Victor ended the call with a satisfied smile, unaware that the happiness he sought to destroy had just grown stronger. Sunlight streamed through the villa's dining room windows, illuminating the breakfast spread laid out on the long table. Fresh fruit glistened like jewels, pastries released sweet aromas, and coffee steamed from silver carafes. But despite the beautiful setting, an undercurrent of tension rippled through the room. Maggie noticed it immediately. Small clusters of wedding guests huddled together, voices lowered, glances darting toward Joseph, who sat at the far end of the table chatting with Maggie's grandchildren. The carefree atmosphere from last night's bonfire had vanished. Eleanor, Maggie's outspoken friend, hurried to her side with a folded newspaper clutched in her hand. "Have you seen this?" she whispered, sliding into the chair beside Maggie. Maggie's heart sank as she unfolded the local paper. There on the front page was Joseph's photograph, an old one from his corporate days, beneath a bold headline: "Wedding Destination, Hosts Disgraced Aviation Tycoon." The article claimed Joseph had left Ramirez Aviation under a cloud of suspicion, with questions about missing funds and questionable business practices. According to an anonymous source close to the family, Joseph had walked away to avoid investigation. "Is there any truth to this?" Eleanor asked, her voice hushed. "Of course not," Maggie said, though her voice faltered. She folded the paper quickly, hoping no one else had seen it, but the whispers and sideways glances told her otherwise. Across the room, Laura's husband bent to show something on his phone to Michael. Her son's face darkened as he scrolled through whatever he was reading. Joseph rose from his seat, ruffling his grandson's hair before walking over to pour himself more coffee. His smile faded as he passed a group of Maggie's church friends, who abruptly stopped talking. He nodded politely, but their return smiles didn't reach their eyes. Maggie watched as Joseph's shoulders stiffened slightly, the only visible sign that he noticed the changing atmosphere. His dignity in the face of their judgment made her heart ache. "I hear there might be legal troubles coming his way," whispered a voice from the table behind Maggie. "My husband checked online. There are forum posts about investor lawsuits from years ago." "Imagine abandoning your own company," another voice replied. "Makes you wonder what he's running from." Maggie gripped her napkin under the table. The gossip felt like physical blows. She watched Joseph cross the room, stopping to help an elderly guest who had dropped her spoon. Always thoughtful, always kind. How could anyone believe these terrible things about him? But a small, traitorous voice whispered in her mind, "He never told you about his wealth until yesterday. What else might he be keeping from you?" Pastor Williams, who had traveled to officiate their ceremony, caught Maggie's eye from across the room. His expression was troubled as he glanced from the newspaper in someone's hands to Joseph. Joseph made his way to Maggie, seemingly oblivious to the buzz around him. "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" he said, touching her shoulder gently. Before she could respond, her son Michael approached, his phone in hand. "Mom, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" His eyes flicked to Joseph, cold and assessing. Maggie rose, following Michael to a quiet corner. As they stepped away, she heard someone murmur, "Poor woman," finding out who she really married the day after the wedding. Her chest tightened with each step. The question echoed in her mind like a warning bell. What else hasn't Joseph told me? The certainty she'd felt on the balcony with Laura just hours ago now seemed fragile as spun glass, ready to shatter at the slightest touch. The sea breeze carried the scent of salt and flowers as the wedding guests gathered on the beach. White chairs formed neat rows on either side of an aisle strewn with rose petals. At its end stood a simple arch twined with jasmine and bougainvillea, framing the endless blue of the ocean beyond. Maggie stood inside the villa, watching through the window as the final preparations came together. Her cream-colored dress fluttered against her legs, elegant but understated, just like she'd always wanted. In her hands, she clutched a bouquet of daisies, the same simple flowers Joseph had brought to her classroom that morning that now felt so long ago. "Are you sure about this, Mom?" Laura asked, adjusting Maggie's necklace. The question held none of the earlier judgment, only genuine concern. Maggie turned from the window. "There are things I still need to understand, but yes, I'm sure about Joseph." The morning's newspaper and whispers had planted seeds of doubt that grew throughout the day. Yet, when she'd finally confronted Joseph about the allegations, his eyes had held nothing but honest pain. "I'll explain everything," he'd promised, "after the ceremony, when we have time. But know this, I've never taken anything that wasn't mine." The first strains of violin music drifted through the open window. It was time. "Ready?" Michael appeared at the doorway, handsome in his suit, arm extended. Maggie took a deep breath and slipped her hand into her son's. "Ready." The guests rose as Maggie stepped onto the sand. The setting sun painted everything in shades of gold and amber, as if the world itself had been dipped in honey. Despite the morning's tensions, everyone had come. Some faces showed lingering doubt, others support, but all eyes were on her. And then she saw Joseph. He stood straight and dignified beneath the arch, watching her with such tenderness that her steps faltered. This was the same man who had mopped school hallways with quiet pride, who had picked wildflowers for her desk, who had never once complained when others looked down on him. Wealth or no wealth, jet or no jet, this was Joseph. She squeezed Michael's arm, finding her rhythm again. When she reached the altar, Joseph took her hands in his. Up close, she could see the faint lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair evidence of a life fully lived, with all its joys and sorrows. "Dearly beloved," Pastor Williams began, his voice carrying over the sound of waves. The ceremony proceeded, a blur of readings and prayers. Maggie was aware only of Joseph's hands holding hers, steady as always. When the time came for their vows, Joseph's voice grew stronger, each word ringing with certainty. Maggie, I came to you with empty hands but a full heart. Today I stand before you, before God, and before these witnesses to promise you my truth, my loyalty, and my love until my final breath. The world may give and take away fortunes, but what I give you can never be lost or stolen. His voice caught slightly. I vow to give you love richer than gold and faith stronger than doubt. Tears spilled down Maggie's cheeks. Around them, sniffles and sighs rippled through the gathering. Even those who had whispered most harshly that morning dabbed at their eyes. The doubt that had clouded the day seemed to dissolve in the warmth of Joseph's words. As Maggie spoke her own vows, she felt something settle within her, a certainty that whatever truths remained to be told, they would face them together. When Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, cheers erupted, genuine and heartfelt. Maggie and Joseph turned to face their guests, and for that perfect moment, there was only love. The reception hall glowed with twinkling lights strung from rafters, transforming the simple space into something magical. Laughter mingled with music as servers weaved between tables with trays of coastal delicacies, fresh caught fish, tropical fruits, and glasses of sparkling champagne. Maggie couldn't remember the last time she'd felt this happy. Joseph held her close as they swayed on the dance floor, his steps sure and steady despite the upbeat tempo. Have I told you how beautiful you are tonight, Mrs. Ramirez? He whispered, his breath warm against her ear. Only about 10 times. She laughed, feeling like a young girl again. But I don't mind hearing it once more. He spun her outward, then pulled her back with surprising grace. For a man who had spent years pushing mops down school hallways, Joseph moved with unexpected elegance. But then again, Maggie was discovering there were many unexpected things about her new husband. The song ended, and Joseph excused himself to get them drinks. Maggie watched him go, her heart full. Around her, guests who had once whispered behind their hands now raised glasses in celebration. The coastal air had washed away pretense, leaving only joy in its wake. Mom? Michael appeared at her side, his face flushed from dancing. I owe you an apology. Maggie turned to her son, surprised by the emotion in his eyes. I judged Joseph unfairly. I was so caught up in protecting Dad's memory that I couldn't see what was right in front of me. He glanced across the room to where Joseph chatted warmly with Maggie's grandchildren. He's a good man. The best, Maggie agreed, squeezing Michael's hand. Michael cleared his throat. He asked if I would mind if he considered my kids his grandchildren. That's something Dad would have done. Before Maggie could respond, Joseph returned. Without hesitation, Michael clapped him on the back, in a gesture of genuine acceptance. Welcome to the family, Michael said, the last of his resistance melting away. Joseph's eyes met Maggie's over her son's shoulder, and the look they shared contained a world of meaning. They had weathered the storm of doubt together and emerged stronger. The band struck up another lively tune, and soon the dance floor filled again. Maggie watched as Laura coaxed Joseph into a dance with her daughters, the girls giggling as he attempted to follow their energetic steps. Your husband is quite the hit, Eleanor said, appearing beside Maggie with a slice of cake. Hard to believe this is the same man everyone was whispering about last week. Maggie smiled. People see what they want to see, Eleanor. Joseph has always been exactly who he islanded. The celebration continued as the evening deepened. Joseph found his way back to Maggie, pulling her into another dance. This time, others cleared a space, watching the newlyweds with genuine delight. I never thought I'd be this happy again, Maggie admitted as they moved across the floor. This is just the beginning, Joseph promised. Waiters began circulating with dessert trays, delicate pastries filled with fruit and cream. Guests returned to their tables, anticipation building for the final sweet course of the evening. Maggie and Joseph had just taken their seats when the main door swung open. The music faltered, then stopped entirely. 3 men in dark suits entered, their expressions grave and purposeful. The federal agents scanned the room until their eyes landed on Joseph. The laughter died. Champagne glasses froze midway to lips. The beautiful bubble of celebration burst as silence fell across the hall like a heavy curtain. Joseph Ramirez? The tallest agent stepped forward, his voice cutting through the silence. I'm Special Agent Dawson with the Financial Crimes Division. We need to speak with you regarding missing funds from Ramirez Aviation Holdings. The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples of shock across the room. Guests exchanged glances, mouths agape. Someone dropped a fork. The clatter unnaturally loud in the stunned quiet. Joseph slowly rose from his seat, his face calm but pale. What seems to be the problem, gentlemen? We're investigating the disappearance of approximately $12 million from company accounts before your departure. Agent Dawson's emphasis on the last word hung in the air. We have reason to believe you may have information pertinent to our investigation. From across the room, Victor leaned against a pillar, a glass of champagne dangling from his fingers. His lips curled into a satisfied smirk as he watched the scene unfold, the carefully orchestrated demolition of his brother's perfect day. This is outrageous, Joseph said quietly. There must be some mistake. Maggie stood beside him, her hand finding his. The white lace of her wedding dress suddenly felt too heavy, too bright under the harsh scrutiny of dozens of staring eyes. No mistake, sir. A second agent produced a folder. We have documentation showing irregular transfers authorized under your signature during your final months as CEO. Murmurs rippled through the wedding guests. Maggie caught fragments of whispered conversations. Always thought it was strange, a man with money working as a janitor. Poor Maggie. She had no idea. What if he was just after her savings all along? Joseph's hand tightened around Maggie's. I assure you, I've done nothing wrong. I'm happy to cooperate with your investigation, but this is my wedding day. We understand the timing is unfortunate, Agent Dawson replied without a hint of sympathy. We'll need you to come in for questioning tomorrow morning. Until then, please don't leave the area. The third agent handed Joseph a business card. 9 a.m. sharp. Joseph nodded stiffly, pocketing the card. The agents, their message delivered, turned and left with the same cold efficiency with which they'd arrived. The celebration lay in ruins around them. As if awakening from a trance, the band began to play again a soft, uncertain melody that no one wanted to dance to. Guests pretended to return to their desserts, but their attention remained fixed on Joseph and Maggie. Joseph? Maggie's voice trembled. What's happening? Before he could answer, Laura appeared at Maggie's elbow, her face tight with concern. Michael stood behind her, jaw clenched. Mom, we need to talk to you. Now. Laura's voice left no room for argument as she gently but firmly pulled Maggie away from Joseph. Joseph didn't resist. Go ahead, he said softly. I'll be right here. Maggie allowed her children to lead her into a small antechamber off the main hall. As the door closed behind them, she caught a final glimpse of Joseph standing alone amid the wreckage of their perfect day, shoulders straight but eyes full of sorrow. Mom, what's going on? Michael demanded once they were alone. Did you know about this? Know about what? There's obviously been some terrible mistake, Maggie insisted, her voice rising. Joseph would never. Mom. Laura took Maggie's hands in hers. You've known him less than a year. First, he's a janitor, then suddenly he owns a private jet, and now federal agents are investigating him for missing millions. What else don't we know? Michael paced the small room. This is exactly what I was afraid of. We don't know anything about this man. I know his heart, Maggie whispered. Laura and Michael exchanged looks of pity and concern. Mom, Michael said gently, who did you really marry? The question pierced Maggie like a physical blow. She sank into a nearby chair as the beautiful certainty she'd felt just moments ago crumbled inside her. Her heart, so full of joy, now shattered into 1,000 painful pieces. Moonlight spilled through the windows of the seaside villa, casting long silver shadows across the polished floor. Maggie sat motionless in the wicker chair, staring out at the restless ocean. Her wedding dress hung in the closet now, replaced by a simple nightgown, but she felt no less trapped in a moment that shouldn't exist. Joseph moved quietly around the room, his reflection appearing and disappearing in the windowpane as he paced. The celebration had ended hours ago, guests dispersing in whispers and sidelong glances. Even Laura and Michael had retreated to their rooms, leaving Maggie with nothing but questions that burned like acid. You should try to sleep, Joseph said softly. How could I possibly sleep? Maggie's voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. Our wedding day. Federal agents. Missing millions. Joseph sighed and sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress barely shifted under his weight. I know how this looks. Do you? Maggie finally turned to face him. Because it looks like my children were right. It looks like I married a stranger. Maggie. His voice carried that steady calm she'd always loved, but now it felt like deception. You know me better than anyone ever has. Do I? She wrapped her arms around herself. The janitor I fell in love with doesn't have federal investigations hanging over him. Joseph leaned forward, elbows on his knees. His face looked older in the moonlight, lines etched deeper by shadows. The money they're talking about, I didn't take it. Victor did. Then why are they investigating you? Because Victor made it look like I did. Joseph ran a hand through his silver hair. When I discovered the corruption, the embezzlement, I couldn't be part of it. I walked away from everything. But walking away meant I couldn't defend myself without dragging others down with me. Who? Who would have been hurt? Maggie demanded. Good people, employees who trusted me. Joseph closed his eyes briefly. Single parents who needed those jobs. People who reminded me of you, actually. Something in Maggie wanted to believe him, but doubt had taken root too deeply. Why didn't you tell me any of this before? All those months together. All those quiet evenings when you could have trusted me with the truth. I wanted you to love Joseph the janitor, not Joseph the businessman with a complicated past. His voice cracked slightly. I wanted to be the man I'd become, not the man I'd been. Those aren't different people, Joseph. They're both you. Maggie felt tears burning behind her eyes, and I can't help thinking that if you hid this, what else might you be hiding? Joseph stood and crossed to the window, kneeling beside her chair. Nothing. I swear to you. He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. Maggie, I've never stolen a penny in my life. This will all be cleared up when I meet with them tomorrow. And if it isn't, Maggie whispered, it will be. Joseph's certainty felt like a wall between them. The truth will protect us, Maggie. It always does. The calm in his voice, that unshakable faith, suddenly felt alien to her. How could he be so certain when her world was collapsing? You don't understand, she said. Even if they clear your name tomorrow, this night still happened. This doubt still exists. Her voice caught. You let me walk into this blindfolded. Joseph reached for her again, his eyes pleading. Maggie, please. Trust me one more time. Maggie turned away, looking back to the endless dark ocean beyond the window. I don't even know if I can believe you anymore, she whispered, feeling the rift between them deepen with each breath, each heartbeat, each moment of silence that followed. Dawn broke over the ocean, painting the waves in shades of pink and gold. Joseph walked barefoot along the shoreline, pants rolled up to his ankles as the cool water lapped at his feet. His shoulders, usually so straight and strong, curved inward against the morning breeze. He stopped occasionally to pick up a shell, examine it, then toss it back into the retreating tide. From the villa's patio, Maggie watched him, a cup of untouched tea growing cold between her hands. She hadn't slept more than a few minutes all night, her mind racing with questions that had no answers. There you are. Eleanor's familiar voice broke through her thoughts. The older woman settled into the chair beside Maggie, her sharp eyes missing nothing. You look like you've been through the ringer, dear. Maggie managed a weak smile. That's putting it mildly. Eleanor followed Maggie's gaze to Joseph's distant figure. I heard about what happened. The whole place is buzzing with it. I'm sure they are. Maggie's voice cracked. Everyone who doubted us feels vindicated now. Is that what you're worried about? What people think? Eleanor reached over and patted Maggie's hand. Because if that's all, then it's not. Maggie set her tea down with a clatter. I'm worried that I married a man I don't know. A man who kept secrets about his past, his money, his brother. What else hasn't he told me, Eleanor? Eleanor's expression softened. Did you ask him? He says there's nothing else. Maggie shook her head. But he would say that, wouldn't he? Look at him, Eleanor said, nodding toward Joseph's solitary figure. Does that look like a guilty man to you? Maggie watched as Joseph bent down, picked up a stone, and skipped it across the water. The simple, almost childlike gesture broke something inside her. I don't know what guilt looks like anymore. She wiped at a tear. He was so calm last night, Eleanor. Everyone else was falling apart, and he just sat there saying the truth would protect us. What kind of person is that sure of themselves when their life is crumbling? An innocent one, perhaps. Eleanor took a sip from her own cup. Or someone who's weathered worse storms. Maggie turned to face her friend. But why keep all this from me? We were supposed to start our life together with honesty. Eleanor considered this for a moment. Sometimes people hide things not because they're ashamed, but because they're afraid of losing what matters most. She looked meaningfully at Maggie. Maybe he thought if you knew about his past, the wealth, the company problems, his brother's betrayal, you'd see him differently. I would have understood, Maggie insisted. Would you? Eleanor's question hung in the air. Or would you have wondered if he was marrying you to hide from his old life? To use you as a shield against his past? The thought hadn't occurred to Maggie, and it struck her like a physical blow. Down on the beach, Joseph had stopped walking. He stood facing the ocean, waves washing over his feet, shoulders squared against the rising Sunday. Even from a distance, there was something dignified about his solitude. I don't know what to believe anymore, Maggie whispered. Eleanor squeezed her hand. Then perhaps that's where you need to start, by believing in what made you fall in love with him in the first place. Maggie continued watching Joseph from afar, her heart pulled in opposite directions. Part of her wanted to run down to the beach and throw her arms around him. Another part wanted to pack her bags and flee from the stranger she'd married. She remained frozen in between, torn between love and betrayal, unable to move either way. The afternoon sun blazed overhead as Maggie sat alone on the villa's patio, thumbing through a paperback without absorbing a single word. The wedding guests had mostly retreated to their rooms or gone sightseeing, eager to escape the cloud of scandal that hung over the celebration. A rental car pulled into the circular driveway, its tires crunching on the gravel. Maggie looked up, expecting to see more federal agents, or perhaps reporters who'd caught wind of the story. Instead, a petite woman with dark hair streaked with silver stepped out. She wore a crisp pantsuit and carried herself with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where she was going. The woman marched straight to the villa's entrance and spoke briefly with the concierge. Moments later, he appeared at the patio door. Mrs. Ramirez, there's a Rosa Delgado here to see you and your husband. Maggie's heart skipped. Another surprise from Joseph's past. I'll see her, my husband Island. She hesitated. He's not available right now. Rosa Delgado approached with quick, determined steps. Up close, Maggie could see the fine lines around her eyes that reflected both strength and compassion. Mrs. Ramirez, I apologize for arriving unannounced. I flew in as soon as I heard what happened. Her handshake was firm. I worked for your husband for 15 years at Ramirez Aviation. Maggie gestured to the chair across from her. Please, sit down. Rosa settled into the seat, her posture perfect. I imagine you have questions. I hope I can provide some answers. You knew Joseph before he became a janitor. It wasn't a question. Rosa's eyes widened slightly. A janitor? Joseph Ramirez? She shook her head in disbelief. I knew he stepped away from the company, but I had no idea. Why are you here, Miss Delgado? Rosa leaned forward. Because your husband saved my career and my life 7 years ago, and I can't stand by while Victor destroys his reputation again. Something in Rosa's tone made Maggie listen more closely. I was a single mother with 2 children when I started working for Ramirez Aviation. Joseph promoted me to finance director when no one else would take a chance on a woman with my background. Rosa's voice grew stronger with each word. Then I discovered discrepancies in the company accounts, large sums of money disappearing. The missing funds they're investigating now, Maggie said softly. Rosa nodded. Victor was systematically embezzling from the company. When I brought my findings to Joseph, he confronted his brother. Victor threatened to frame me instead, to claim I was the one stealing. Maggie's throat tightened. What did Joseph do? He called an emergency board meeting, laid out all the evidence against Victor. But several board members were in Victor's pocket. Rosa's hands clenched into fists. They threatened to destroy the company with a public scandal unless Joseph resigned quietly. They would handle Victor internally, they said. And Joseph agreed? Maggie whispered. He did more than agree. He sold his controlling shares at a fraction of their worth, on the condition that no employees would lose their jobs. Rosa's eyes glistened. He walked away from everything he built to protect us. Hope flickered in Maggie's chest for the first time since the agents had arrived. But why is this happening now? Because Victor was never punished. He was too valuable to the corrupt board members. Rosa reached into her bag and pulled out a flash drive. I've spent years gathering evidence, bank transfers, offshore accounts. It's all here. Rosa's voice hardened. It was Victor who embezzled the funds, every penny of it, and I'm ready to testify. Maggie's hands trembled as she held a stack of papers Rosa had printed from the flash drive. Bank statements, board meeting minutes, legal documents with Joseph's signature, all telling the same story of sacrifice and integrity. These prove everything, Rosa said, pointing to a particular document. This is the sales agreement where Joseph gave up his shares. Look at the clause he insisted on no employee layoffs for at least 3 years. Maggie traced Joseph's signature with her fingertip. He never told me any of this. Joseph doesn't believe in defending himself with words. Rosa's voice softened. He let his actions speak. Always has. Maggie gathered the papers, a new determination straightening her spine. Thank you, Rosa. I need to find my husband. She found Joseph where she knew he'd be at the shoreline. His pants rolled up to his knees as small waves lapped around his ankles. His back was to her, shoulders slumped but still somehow dignified in their resignation. The sand shifted under her feet as she approached. Joseph turned at the sound, his weathered face showing both surprise and worriness. Maggie? His voice held a question. She held up the documents. Rosa Delgado is here. She brought these. Joseph's eyes widened. Rosa came all this way? She wouldn't let Victor win again. Maggie stepped closer, the breeze ruffling the papers in her hand. You gave up everything to protect your employees. You walked away from wealth and position rather than fight Victor publicly? Joseph looked out at the horizon. The company was more than just mine. 500 families depended on those jobs. But why become a janitor? Why hide who you really were? A small smile touched his lips. I wasn't hiding. I was finding something I'd lost. He turned to face her fully. When you have money and power, people wear masks around you. As a janitor, I saw people as they truly were. No one pretends for the man who empties their trash. Understanding dawned in Maggie's eyes. That's why you never told me. Joseph nodded. I wanted someone to love Joseph the man, not Joseph the former CEO. And you did, Maggie. You saw me when I was invisible to everyone else. She stepped closer, pressing the documents against his chest. These will clear your name. The agents will see that Victor was behind everything. Joseph took the papers, leafed through them slowly. His hands began to shake. All these years, he whispered, I thought I'd never be free of his shadow. You already were, Maggie said softly. You were free the moment you chose integrity over wealth. Joseph's eyes filled with tears, one escaping to track down his weathered cheek. His shoulders trembled as years of carried burden began to lift. He made no sound, but his tears spoke volumes, relief, vindication, and the raw vulnerability of a man who has stood alone for too long. Maggie closed the distance between them, wrapping her arms around his solid frame. The papers crinkled between them as she held him tight, her cheek pressed against his chest where she could feel his heart beating strong and steady. I never stopped loving you, she whispered against his shirt. Not for one moment. His arms encircled her, tentative at first, then with the strength of a man reclaiming his life. They stood together as the waves washed around their feet, erasing their footprints, but not the path that had brought them to this moment of truth. The villa's grand dining room had transformed into an impromptu courtroom. Agents in dark suits sat at one end of the polished table, while Joseph and Maggie sat together at the other. Between them, Rosa Delgado arranged her documents with precise, confident movements. Guests and family members lined the walls, murmuring in hushed tones. Thank you all for coming, Joseph said, his voice steady but humble. I believe Mrs. Delgado has information that will clear this matter up once and for all. Victor leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed and a smirk playing on his lips. This ought to be entertaining. The lead agent, a stern-faced woman named Agent Morris, nodded at Rosa. We're listening, Mrs. Delgado. Rosa stood, straightening her simple blouse. Her eyes found Joseph's first, a silent exchange of respect between them before she addressed the room. 7 years ago, I was a financial analyst at Ramirez Aviation. I discovered irregularities in the company accounts, money being siphoned to offshore holdings. She slid a folder toward Agent Morris. These are the original bank statements showing transfers to accounts controlled by Victor Ramirez. Victor pushed off from the doorway. This is absurd. My brother's trying to save his own skin. I have the digital trail, Rosa continued, undeterred. When I brought this to Joseph's attention, he launched an internal investigation rather than going public to protect the company's reputation and the jobs that depended on it. She produced another document, her fingers trembling slightly. This is the board meeting transcript where Joseph confronted Victor. But Victor had already bought off 2 board members. They threatened to blackmail Joseph with false allegations if he went public. Maggie reached for Joseph's hand beneath the table. He squeezed back, his eyes never leaving Rosa. So Joseph made a choice, Rosa said, her voice gaining strength. He sold his shares, established that 3-year protection clause for employees, and walked away. He chose the workers over his own reputation. Agent Morris flipped through the evidence, her expression unreadable. And the missing funds? Rosa slid over one final document, a banking statement with highlighted transactions. They weren't missing. They were stolen by Victor Ramirez. The money trail leads directly to his personal accounts in the Cayman Islands. All eyes turned to Victor, whose smirk had vanished. His face darkened like a thundercloud. This is a setup, he snarled. My brother was always the family saint, wasn't he? Poor Joseph, with his bleeding heart. He couldn't handle business realities, so he ran away. Joseph finally spoke, his voice quiet but carrying across the hushed room. Running away would have been easier, Victor. Staying silent was the hardest thing I've ever done. Agent Morris stood, nodding to her colleagues. Mr. Victor Ramirez, based on this evidence, we're placing you under investigative custody for financial fraud and embezzlement. Victor's face contorted with rage. He slammed his fist on the nearest table, sending glasses toppling. This is ridiculous. You can't seriously believe this janitor over me. The evidence speaks for itself, Agent Morris replied coolly. As the agents approached Victor, he lunged toward Joseph, pointing an accusing finger. You think you've won? You've always been pathetic, pretending to be noble when you're just weak. The agents caught Victor's arms, restraining him as he continued to shout. The room erupted in gasps and whispers as Victor was led away, his threats and curses fading down the hallway. In the aftermath, a strange quiet settled over the room. Then someone began to applaud Maggie's son, Michael. Others joined in, the applause building until it filled the space where accusations had hung moments before. Maggie leaned close to Joseph's ear. Justice, she whispered. At last. After Victor's dramatic exit, Agent Morris returned to the dining room. Her stern expression softened around the edges. She approached Joseph and Maggie with purposeful steps as the crowd parted to make way. Mr. Ramirez, she said, extending her hand to Joseph. On behalf of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, I offer our formal apology for the disruption to your wedding celebration. Joseph stood and accepted her handshake with a simple nod. The lines in his face showed the weight of years carrying secrets, but his eyes held only relief. Based on Mrs. Delgado's evidence and our preliminary verification, we're officially clearing your name of any wrongdoing in this matter. Agent Morris handed him an official letter. This confirms you are no longer under investigation. A collective sigh of relief rippled through the room. Maggie's eyes welled with tears as she clutched Joseph's arm. Thank you, Joseph said. His voice was quiet but carried across the now silent room. Truth takes time, but it always finds its way to the light. As the agents gathered their materials to leave, guests began approaching Joseph one by one. Eleanor, Maggie's blunt friend who had once questioned the marriage most vocally, was the first to step forward. Joseph, she said, her cheeks flushed with shame. I judged you without knowing you. I'm sorry. Joseph shook his head. No apologies needed. You were looking out for Maggie. Pastor Williams, who had traveled from their hometown to officiate the wedding, clasped Joseph's shoulder. Your humility in the face of such accusations speaks volumes about your character, son. I never wanted wealth to define me, Joseph replied. Just my actions. The procession continued. Friends, family members, even distant acquaintances who had whispered behind Maggie's back. Each came with humble words and downcast eyes. Michael, Maggie's son, approached last. He stood before Joseph, struggling to find words. I thought, he began, then stopped. I was wrong about you. Dead wrong. And I'm sorry I didn't stand by my mother's choice. Joseph embraced him. Your mother raised good children who protect her. I respect that. Rosa approached Maggie as the crowd began to disperse, returning to the reception area where music was starting up again. Mrs. Ramirez, she said with a warm smile. I worked for your husband for 12 years. There's not a finer man alive. I know, Maggie replied, dabbing at her eyes. I knew it all along. The money never mattered to him, Rosa continued. When my daughter needed specialized medical care, Joseph paid for everything anonymously. He thought I never found out. She squeezed Maggie's hand. That's the real wealth he carries. When the room had cleared except for Joseph and Maggie, he turned to her, taking both her hands in his. I'm sorry for the pain this caused you, he said. I wanted to protect you from my past. Maggie shook her head, a gentle smile lighting her face. No more secrets between us, Joseph Ramirez. Not even the good ones. From the reception hall, they could hear laughter and music starting up again. The celebration was resuming, transformed from a gathering clouded by doubt into one illuminated by truth. They're waiting for us, Joseph said. Maggie took his hand firmly in hers. Then let's not keep them waiting any longer. As they walked through the double doors into the reception hall, their guests erupted in cheers and applause that echoed off the high ceilings louder, more genuine, and more joyful than before. This wasn't just a wedding celebration anymore. It was a vindication. The band struck up a lively tune as couples flooded the dance floor. Where there had been tension and whispers just an hour before, now laughter and joy filled the air. The relief was palpable like a summer storm had passed, leaving everything washed clean and new. Maggie watched from the edge of the dance floor as her friends kicked off their shoes and danced with abandon. Eleanor, usually so proper, twirled with her husband of 40 years, her face flushed with delight. Pastor Williams clapped along, his dignity giving way to the infectious celebration. Joseph stood nearby, deep in conversation with Rosa and a few other former employees who had come to support him. His posture was relaxed now, the weight of secrecy finally lifted from his shoulders. Michael approached, carrying his 5-year-old son Jamie on his hip. His older boy, Thomas, trailed behind him, suddenly shy. Joseph? Michael said, clearing his throat. The kids were hoping. Well, I was hoping. Maybe you join us for the father-son dance coming up? I know Dad's not here anymore, but... He glanced at his boys. They could use another grandfather in their lives. Joseph's eyes widened, and Maggie felt her heart swell as she watched his reaction. This was the acceptance she had prayed for, not just for herself, but for the good man she had chosen. I'd be honored, Joseph said, his voice thick with emotion. He knelt down to Thomas's level. What do you say, young man? May I have this dance? Thomas nodded, a smile breaking across his face. Mom says you fly planes. That's right, Joseph replied. And someday, if your mom and dad say it's okay, I'll take you up in one. The boy's eyes lit up. Promise? I promise. When the band announced the father-son dance, Joseph took Thomas's hand while Michael carried Jamie to the floor. Other fathers and sons joined them, some with toddlers perched on their shoes, others with grown men sharing meaningful glances. Maggie watched through tears. As Joseph taught Thomas a simple box step, the boy's face scrunched in concentration. Jamie reached from Michael's arms toward Joseph, who swept the little boy up into a 3-person dance that had Thomas giggling. He's a natural, Eleanor said, appearing at Maggie's side. I should have seen it sooner. He always was, Maggie replied softly. Wealth or no wealth. As the song ended, the band transitioned to a slow, romantic melody. Joseph handed the boys back to Michael with a warm pat on the shoulder, then made his way through the crowd to Maggie. May I have this dance, Mrs. Ramirez? He asked, extending his hand. She took it without hesitation, following him to the center of the floor. His hand rested gently at her waist, steady and sure as they swayed to the music. Thank you, Maggie whispered, for being exactly who you are. The janitor who noticed the beauty in everyday things, the businessman who walked away with his integrity intact, and the man who never needed to boast about either. Joseph pulled her closer, their steps perfectly in sync. All around them, Guests smiled warmly at the couple, the same people who had once whispered and doubted. He leaned in, his lips brushing her ear. Now they see what you've always known. Maggie closed her eyes, resting her head against his shoulder as they danced beneath the twinkling lights, finally free of judgment and secrets, surrounded by a love that had proven itself stronger than doubt. Golden morning light spilled across the villa's terrace as Joseph stood before the assembled family members. The ocean sparkled behind him, a perfect backdrop for new beginnings. Everyone had gathered for a farewell breakfast before departing the coastal paradise. Maggie's children and grandchildren, Eleanor and her husband, and the few close friends who had stayed after yesterday's dramatic events. Joseph cleared his throat, his hands steady as he placed them on the back of a chair. Though he'd never been one for speeches, today's words came from his heart. I want to thank all of you for standing by Maggie and me through this unexpected wedding journey. Gentle laughter rippled through the group. Yesterday cleared more than just my name. It cleared a path forward. Michael leaned forward, curious. What do you mean? For 15 years, I've kept my distance from the aviation industry that I once loved. I walked away to protect people, but I've realized that staying away might have been the easier choice, not the right one. Joseph paused, looking at each face around the table. The grandchildren watched with wide eyes, while Laura and Michael exchanged intrigued glances. I'm going to rebuild Ramirez Aviation, but not as it was before. This time, it will be a non-profit organization focused on training and employing those who've struggled to find their place, veterans returning from service, widows and widowers rebuilding their lives, young people from disadvantaged communities. Maggie felt her breath catch. They hadn't discussed this plan in detail, yet hearing it now, she recognized it as perfectly, completely Joseph. We'll offer flight training, aircraft maintenance programs, and administrative positions. The fleet will serve communities that need medical transport, disaster relief, and educational outreach. Rosa, who had stayed on as a guest after yesterday's revelations, nodded with approval. The industry needs this kind of vision, Joseph. Count me in. Is that why you kept your pilot's license current all these years? Maggie asked softly, remembering how he'd occasionally disappear for weekends to log flight hours. Joseph smiled at her. I suppose deep down, I always knew I'd return to the sky someday. I just needed the right reason. Little Jamie tugged at Joseph's pant leg. Can I learn to fly too, Grandpa Joe? The room grew quiet at the child's innocent use of the title. Joseph knelt down, meeting the boy at eye level. Someday, if that's what you want. But you know what makes a good pilot? Patience, responsibility, and looking out for others. Those are things you can practice starting right now. Laura wiped away a tear, watching her son nod solemnly at Joseph's words. I've set aside startup funds, Joseph continued, standing again. But this isn't about my money. It's about creating something meaningful together. Michael stood up and extended his hand to Joseph. I work in marketing. Maybe I could help with outreach and fundraising. I know some veterans who would jump at this opportunity, Eleanor's husband added. As the conversation bloomed with possibilities and offers of assistance, Maggie watched her husband's face. The humble janitor who had mopped floors with quiet dignity now stood tall among family and friends, his vision bringing them together in a way no wealth ever could. When Joseph caught her eye across the table, Maggie beamed with pride. She'd married a wealthy man after all, rich in compassion, integrity, and vision. That was the kind of fortune that would leave a legacy long after they were gone. That evening, Joseph stood on the tarmac beside his gleaming jet, watching as Maggie's grandchildren bounced with excitement. The coastal airport glowed in the late afternoon sun, casting long shadows across the runway. Is everyone ready for a sunset flight? Joseph's voice carried across the small crowd of family members. 8-year-old Jamie couldn't contain himself. We're going up in a real airplane, a real one. His sister Emma, 2 years older and determined to appear more sophisticated, rolled her eyes but couldn't hide her smile. It's a jet, dummy, not just an airplane. Michael placed gentle hands on his children's shoulders. Remember what we talked about inside voices and seatbelts? Laura snapped photos as Joseph helped each grandchild up the stairs. I never thought I'd see my kids on a private jet, she whispered to Maggie. Life has a way of surprising us, Maggie replied, squeezing her daughter's hand. Inside the aircraft, luxury surrounded them, soft leather seats, polished wood tables, and large windows perfect for viewing the sunset. Joseph moved toward the cockpit with practiced ease, stopping to help little ones with their seatbelts along the way. "Grandpa Joe, can I sit with you?" Jamie tugged at Joseph's sleeve. Joseph glanced at Michael, who nodded his approval. "First mate Jamie, report to the cockpit," Joseph said with a wink. As pre-flight checks were completed, Maggie watched Joseph's transformation. The man whose hands had mopped school hallways for years now moved confidently through switches and instruments, his fingers certain and strong. His voice, always quiet in social settings, came through clear and authoritative on the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard. We'll be taking a scenic route along the coastline before circling back. Flight time approximately 45 minutes. The engines hummed to life. Jamie's excited squeals from the cockpit made everyone laugh. The jet began to move, picking up speed until suddenly they were airborne, climbing toward the golden sky. Eleanor gasped as the coastline came into view. "It's like a painting," she murmured. The children pressed their faces against windows as beaches and cliffs passed beneath them. Joseph's voice occasionally came through the speakers, pointing out landmarks. When they reached cruising altitude, Joseph invited each child to visit the cockpit. Their wide-eyed wonder as they returned told the story of magic unfolding. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Joseph set the autopilot and joined Maggie in the cabin. He slipped into the seat beside her, taking her hand in his. "Happy?" he asked simply. "More than I ever imagined possible." Through the windows, the sky transformed into brilliant oranges and pinks. Below them stretched a carpet of clouds, catching the fading light like fields of cotton candy. "I never needed all this," Joseph said, gesturing around the cabin. "But sharing it with you, that makes it worthwhile." Maggie leaned her head against his shoulder, watching their entwined fingers. The gold bands on their ring fingers caught the sunset's glow. The grandchildren's laughter filled the cabin as Michael showed them how to make shadow puppets in the dramatic light. Laura and Eleanor chatted easily, their earlier doubts about Joseph long forgotten. Hand in hand, Maggie and Joseph watched the sunset from above the clouds, their faces bathed in golden light. In that perfect moment, Maggie's heart overflowed with certainty. "They laughed when I married the janitor, but I knew the truth. I married the richest man in the world." If you enjoy the story of Maggie Turner, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.